I'm Clara, 32 female. I live in a quiet suburban town just outside the city, in a house that my husband, Mark, and I bought 3 years ago. By profession, I'm a clinical research coordinator, a job that requires meticulous attention to detail and a strict adherence to protocols. My life was, by all accounts, structured and predictable. That is until the one person who was supposed to protect me conspired with the one person who was supposed to love me to put my life in danger, all over a little bit of control. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. My relationship with my father-in-law, Frank, was never warm. He was a man carved from grease and steel, the owner of a local auto repair shop that had been in his family for 2 generations. He saw the world in black and white. Things were either fixed or broken, and people were either useful or in the way. From the moment Mark introduced us, I felt like Frank had placed me firmly in the second category. I wasn't the kind of daughter-in-law he'd envisioned for his only son. I had a career that he didn't understand, I didn't fawn over Mark's every word, and worst of all, I had opinions. Frank liked women who were seen and not heard, who brought casserole to family dinners and laughed at his stale jokes. I was different. I was independent, and in Frank's world, an independent woman was a threat. Mark, my husband, always played the role of the hapless mediator. "That's just how Dad is," he'd say with a shrug, a phrase that had become the unofficial motto of our marriage. He treated his father's casual cruelty and dismissiveness as a force of nature, like bad weather you just had to wait out. But it wasn't weather, it was a choice. Frank chose to belittle my work, calling it paper pushing. He chose to forget my name at family gatherings, referring to me as Mark's wife. And Mark chose to let him. Over the years, I learned to build a polite but firm wall around myself during family events. I was cordial, I smiled, but I never gave Frank an inch of emotional ground. I thought this strategy was working, that we had reached a state of chilly but stable equilibrium. I was wrong. It was just a Cold War, and Frank was planning a major offensive. The battlefield he chose was my car. It was a modest but reliable sedan, a 5-year-old vehicle that I depended on completely. My job required me to travel between different hospitals and clinics, often carrying sensitive patient data and trial medications. Punctuality wasn't just a professional courtesy for me, it was an ethical requirement. If I was late, it could disrupt a trial schedule that had been planned months in advance. My car was my lifeline, my rolling office, the one piece of my life that was entirely my own. I took meticulous care of it, following the maintenance schedule to the letter, always taking it to a reputable dealership for service. Frank hated this. He saw it as a personal insult that I wouldn't let him, a real mechanic, touch my car. "Why are you letting those crooks at the dealership rip you off?" He'd grumble every time he saw the service sticker on my windshield. "Bring it to my shop. Family gets a discount." The discount wasn't the point. I didn't want to owe him anything. I didn't trust him. My intuition, a finely tuned instrument I relied upon in my professional life, screamed that letting Frank near my car was a terrible idea. But then, a few months ago, the car started making a strange noise. It was a subtle, intermittent clicking sound that seemed to come from the engine, and it only happened when I was accelerating on the highway. I knew I needed to get it checked out immediately. My first instinct was to call the dealership and make an appointment. But when I mentioned it to Mark over dinner, his face lit up in a way that made my stomach clench. "Oh, Dad can fix that," he said, already pulling out his phone. "He knows this engine model inside and out. It'll take him 10 minutes. I tried to protest. "Mark, it's fine. I'd rather just take it to the dealership. They have the specific diagnostic tools and it's still under an extended warranty." Mark's face fell. "Clara, come on. You're going to offend him. He's my father and he's a mechanic. It's what he does. Just let him look at it. It'll make him feel useful and it'll save us a couple $100. There it was, the familiar emotional blackmail. If I said no, I would be the difficult, ungrateful daughter-in-law who was offending his poor, benevolent father. The ensuing argument would ruin our week, and Mark would sulk, accusing me of not trying with his family. The exhaustion of that looming fight weighed on me more than the clicking in my engine. I was tired. Tired of fighting the same battles, tired of having to defend every single boundar. Why, against my better judgment, against every screaming alarm bell in my head, I caved. "Fine," I said, the word tasting like ash. "Fine, tell your dad I'll bring it by on Saturday." Mark beamed, instantly appeased. He pecked me on the cheek and said, "See, was that so hard?" He had no idea. He couldn't see the deep sense of foreboding that had settled over me, a cold, heavy blanket of dread. I felt like I had just willingly handed my enemy the key to my castle. I spent the rest of the week driving with a knot in my stomach, listening to that faint clicking sound and wondering what exactly I had just agreed to. The sound wasn't just in my engine anymore. It was the ticking of a clock, counting down to something I couldn't yet see, but I knew, with absolute certainty, was going to be terrible. Saturday arrived cloaked in a gray, oppressive humidity that mirrored my mood. Driving to Frank's garage, Frank's auto, felt less like a trip for a simple repair and more like a forced march. The building itself was a monument to Frank's personality, old, stubborn, and stained with the grime of decades. The faded blue paint was peeling, and the sign, a relic from the 1980s, flickered erratically. It was a place that time, and perhaps modern automotive technology, had largely forgotten. As I pulled my modern sedan into the cluttered bay, it looked alien amongst the hulks of old American muscle cars that were Frank's true passion. He emerged from the shadows of the garage, wiping his greasy hands on an already filthy rag. He wore his usual uniform of stained blue overalls and a smirk. "Well, well," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Look what the cat dragged in. Finally decided to let a real mechanic look at this thing, huh?" I forced a tight smile. "Hi, Frank, thanks for squeezing me in. As I told Mark, it's just a little clicking noise when I accelerate." Frank circled my car like a predator sizing up its prey. He kicked one of the tires, a gesture of masculine authority that always annoyed me. Clicking noise, eh? Probably nothing. These new cars are mostly plastic and computers anyway. No soul. He ran a grimy finger along my pristine paint job, leaving a greasy streak. I resisted the urge to wipe it off immediately. "So," I said, trying to keep my tone light and professional, "what do you think it could be? Maybe a valve lifter or something with the fuel injection?" I had done some research online, wanting to sound at least moderately informed. This was a mistake. Frank's smirk tightened into a sneer. "A valve lifter? Been reading the internet, have we? Don't you worry your pretty little head about it. I've been fixing engines since before your fancy computers were invented. I'll figure it out." The condescension was so thick I could taste it. He was deliberately positioning me as the clueless female who had no business discussing the inner workings of a machine. I was an inconvenience, a problem to be dealt with, not a customer to be served. Mark had promised to come with me, to act as a buffer, but at the last minute, he'd received a work emergency call. I was alone with Frank, and the cavernous garage suddenly felt very small and suffocating. "Just pop the hood," he grunted, already turning his back on me to grab a set of tools. I did as he asked and stood back, watching as he leaned over my engine. For the next hour, he tinkered and prodded, muttering to himself. He never once explained what he was doing or what he was looking for. When I tried to ask a question, he would wave a dismissive hand and say, "I'm working here." It was a master class in passive-aggressive exclusion. He was making it crystal clear that this was his domain, and I was an unwelcome trespasser. At one point, he pulled out his phone and made a call. He turned his back to me, lowering his voice, but I could still hear snippets of the conversation. "Yeah, no, it's nothing major, just needs a little adjustment. She's here now, looking over my shoulder. Yeah, I know," he chuckled, a low, unpleasant sound that made the hairs on my arms stand up. "Don't worry," he said into the phone, his voice dripping with a strange mix of assurance and something else I couldn't quite place. "I'll take care of it." He hung up and turned back to me, his expression unreadable. "Who was that?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Just Mark," he said, his eyes not quite meeting mine. "Worried about you, told him I had it all under control." He slammed the hood of my car shut with a resounding clang that made me jump. "All done," he announced, wiping his hands on the rag again. "Just a loose connection to the fuel sensor, rattling around, tightened it up for you, good as new." It felt too simple, too quick. The clicking noise had sounded mechanical, deeper in the engine than a loose sensor. "Are you sure that's all it was?" I asked, a sliver of doubt in my voice. The noise was pretty consistent at high speeds. Frank's eyes narrowed. "Are you Questio?" "Ning my work, I've been doing this for 40 years. I said I fixed it, so it's fixed. Or would you rather take it to your dealership boys so they can charge you $500 to tell you the same thing?" The challenge was clear. I had to either accept his word or call him a liar to his face. Trapped, I backed down. "No, of course not. Thank you, Frank, I really appreciate it. How much do I owe you?" He waved his hand dismissively. "Nothing. Forget about it. It was a 10-minute job. Just don't come crying to me when the dealership charges you an arm and a leg for your next oil change." He was trying to make it seem like a generous favor, but it felt like a transaction. I hadn't paid with money, but I had paid with my autonomy. I had been forced to submit to his expertise, to acknowledge his authority in his world of grease and steel. As I got into my car, the interior still smelling faintly of his workshop, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. The air was thick with unspoken words and hidden intentions. I thanked him again, my voice sounding hollow in my own ears, and pulled out of the garage. Driving away, I felt a profound sense of unease. The car felt the same, but I felt different. I felt like I had just been marked. For 2 days, everything seemed fine. The clicking noise was gone, and I started to think that maybe I had overreacted. Maybe my distrust of Frank had colored the entire experience, making me paranoid. Mark was certainly pleased. "See, I told you Dad would handle it," he said triumphantly that evening. "And he didn't even charge you. You should be a little more grateful, Clara." I bit back the retort that gratitude was earned, not demanded. For the sake of a peaceful week, I just nodded and said, "You were right." I tried to convince myself it was true. I had an important meeting on Tuesday, an hour's drive away at a major research hospital. It was the kickoff for a new pharmaceutical trial, and I was the lead coordinator. My presentation was crucial for getting the hospital's various department heads aligned and on board. It was a high-stakes, high-pressure event that I had been preparing for weeks. On Tuesday morning, I was up before dawn, going over my notes one last time. I dressed in my most professional suit, wanting to project an aura of competence and control. I felt ready. I left the house with plenty of time to spare, merging onto the interstate as the sun began to burn through the morning mist. The traffic was light, and I settled into the middle lane, cruising at a steady 65 miles per hour. I was about halfway to my destination, just starting to relax and mentally rehearse the opening of my presentation when it happened. There was no warning. No sputtering, no strange noises, no dashboard lights. The engine just cut out. One moment I was cruising along, the next my car was silent, the power steering gone, the accelerator dead beneath my foot. It was as if the car had simply died. Panic, cold and sharp, shot through me. I was in the middle lane of a 5-lane interstate during the start of rush hour. Cars and massive semi-trucks were rocketing past me on both sides at over 70 miles per hour, their drivers completely unaware that my vehicle was now just a powerless 2-ton metal box coasting to a stop. I flipped on my hazard lights, my heart hammering against my ribs. I gripped the now heavy steering wheel, desperately trying to maneuver the dead car across 2 lanes of speeding traffic to the shoulder. It was one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. Horns blared around me, a symphony of anger and confusion. I saw the furious face of a truck driver in my rearview mirror as he swerved violently to avoid rear-ending me. By some miracle of momentum and the grace of a few attentive drivers, I managed to wrestle the car over to the narrow right-hand shoulder. It rolled to a stop, perilously close to the live lane of traffic. I sat there for a long moment, my hands shaking so badly I could barely unbuckle my seatbelt. The roar of the passing trucks was deafening, and the whole car shuddered each time one thundered by. I was stranded, vulnerable, and a terrifying thought began to bloom in my mind. Frank, this couldn't be a coincidence. The car was running perfectly, and then, just 2 days after he fixed it, it dies catastrophically on the highway. The timing was too perfect, too malicious. My first call was to roadside assistance. They promised a tow truck, but said it could be up to 90 minutes due to traffic. 90 minutes. My meeting started in 40. My career-defining presentation was evaporating before my eyes. My next call was to my boss, my voice trembling as I explained the situation. She was understanding, but I could hear the disappointment and stress in her tone. We would have to reschedule, a logistical nightmare that would make me look unreliable and incompetent. My final call was to Mark. I needed support. I needed to hear his voice, to have him reassure me. What I got was the opposite. "It broke down. Where are you?" he asked, his voice laced with annoyance, not concern. I explained the situation, my voice still shaky with adrenaline. "The engine just cut out, Mark, on the interstate. It was terrifying. Frank said he fixed it, but..." I was cut off. "So what, you're blaming my dad?" he snapped. "Things break, Clara. It's an old car. It's probably just a coincidence." The word coincidence felt like a slap in the face. A coincidence? Mark, he was the last person to touch the engine. It was running perfectly fine before Saturday. Now it's completely dead. I could have been killed. I could hear him sigh, a long, weary sound of exasperation. "Don't be so dramatic. You're fine, aren't you? Look, I'm about to go into a big meeting. I can't deal with this right now. Call the tow truck, get it to a garage. Get it taken to Dad's, he'll look at it again for free." "No," I said, my voice cold and firm. The fog of panic was beginning to recede, replaced by a chilling clarity. "I am not taking it to your father's garage. I'm having it towed to the dealership." "Clara, don't be ridiculous," he argued, his voice rising. "That's going to cost a fortune. Dad won't charge us. You're letting your issues with him cloud your judgment." My judgment. He was accusing me of being irrational while I was sitting on the side of a highway, my life's work for the past month in tatters, because his father had touched my car. The injustice of it was staggering. He wasn't on my side. He wasn't even neutral. He was on his father's side, defending him before he even had any facts. The conversation devolved from there. He accused me of being stubborn and ungrateful. I accused him of being apathetic and a terrible husband. The call ended with him telling me he didn't have time for this and hanging up. I sat in the deafening silence of my dead car, the roar of the highway a backdrop to the crumbling of my marriage. The betrayal wasn't just about the car anymore. It was about Mark. He had chosen his father over me, his convenience over my safety. I was utterly and completely alone. And in that moment of stark isolation, a cold, hard resolve began to form in my heart. This wasn't just a breakdown. It was an attack, and I was going to find out why. The tow truck driver, a kind man with a weathered face named Sal, finally arrived an hour and a half later. His professionalism was a stark contrast to my husband's callousness. He expertly hooked up my car, his calm demeanor helping to soothe my frayed nerves. "You're lucky," he said, shaking his head as he looked at the traffic still screaming past. "This stretch of road is no joke. Glad you're okay." I gave him the address of the dealership, ignoring the multiple texts from Mark, each one more insistent than the last, telling me to send the car to Frank's. I replied with a single curt message: "It's being handled." At the dealership, the service manager, a woman named Maria, listened to my story with a sympathetic ear. "Engine just cut out with no warning? That's unusual for this model," she said, her brow furrowed with concern. "We'll run a full diagnostic, but it might take a day or two to pinpoint the exact cause, especially with an electrical failure this total." I thanked her, left the keys, and took a taxi home, feeling numb and disconnected from the world. The house was empty and silent when I arrived. Mark was still at work, or at least that's what I assumed. I walked through the quiet rooms, our shared life now feeling like a movie set for a film I no longer wanted to be in. The trust I'd had in him, already eroded by years of his passive compliance to his father, had been shattered on that highway shoulder. My mind kept replaying the events: Frank's smirk, his dismissive attitude, the odd phone call, his insistence that it was a simple fix. And Mark's immediate, almost rehearsed defense of his father. It felt coordinated. It felt like a conspiracy, but I had no proof. It was my word against theirs, a classic case of the hysterical wife versus the all-knowing mechanic. I knew how that would play out in their family. I would be painted as paranoid and ungrateful. I needed something concrete, something irrefutable. And then it hit me, an idea so sudden and clear it was like a light switch being flipped on in a dark room. The dash cam. A few months ago, after a minor fender bender, I had installed a forward-facing dashcam for insurance purposes. It was set to record audio and video whenever the car was on. It recorded my entire drive to Frank's garage. It recorded my entire time there. It had been running when he leaned over my engine. It had been running when he made that phone call. My heart started to beat faster. The camera's memory card was still in the device, inside my car at the dealership. I immediately called Maria. "Hi Maria, it's Clara. A strange request, but is there any way I could get access to my car for just a moment? I need to retrieve something from my dashcam. It's very important." Maria was hesitant at first, citing service bay policies, but I must have sounded desperate enough that she relented. "Okay, but make it quick. We're about to close up for the day." I took another taxi, my mind racing the entire way. What if the camera hadn't picked up anything? What if the audio was too muffled by the garage noises? What if I was just grasping at straws, letting my paranoia run wild? I couldn't afford to be wrong. When I got to the dealership, Maria escorted me to my car. It was parked in a quiet corner of the service area, looking sad and inert. I reached in, my hand trembling slightly as I ejected the tiny micro SD card from the side of the dashcam. It felt impossibly small and flimsy to hold the key to my entire situation. Back home, I inserted the card into a reader and plugged it into my laptop. I pulled up the video files, my breath held tight in my chest. The folder was full of clips, each one 5 minutes long. I found the ones from Saturday morning. I clicked play. The first few clips showed my drive to the garage. Then, the view changed to the grimy interior of Frank's workshop. I fast-forwarded through the parts where he was just tinkering, the sound of clanking metal and his occasional grunts filling my headphones. Then I got to the part where he pulled out his phone. I slowed the video down to normal speed. The camera was pointed forward, so all I could see was the back of Frank's head and shoulders as he leaned over the engine bay. But the microphone was surprisingly sensitive. I could hear his side of the conversation clearly, layered over the distant sound of an air wrench from another bay. "Yeah, it's Mark," I heard Frank say, so it was definitely my husband on the other end of the line. No, she bought it. "Thinks it's just a loose wire." A cold dread washed over me. He knew it wasn't a loose wire. He was actively lying to me. I leaned closer to the screen, turning up the volume as high as it would go. Frank chuckled that low, guttural chuckle I hated so much. She was trying to tell me what she thought it was. Read it on the internet, probably. He paused, listening to whatever Mark was saying on the other end. Then came the words that would change everything. The words that confirmed my worst fears and sealed his fate. "Don't you worry," Frank said, his voice low and conspiratorial, a venomous whisper. "I'm setting it up right now. It'll go for a day or two, maybe even 3. Then, nothing, it'll just die, no warning at all." He paused again, a cruel smile evident in his tone even if I couldn't see his face. "This should do it," he said, the words full of finality and malice. "This will teach her to be a little more respectful." He hung up. I watched as his silhouette on the screen straightened up, turned around, and then walked back toward the front of my car, toward the camera's view, ready to tell me that everything was fixed. I hit pause. The image on the screen was frozen, but the world around me was spinning. I played the audio clip back, and again, there was no mistaking it. This should do it. This will teach her to be a little more respectful. It was premeditated. It was a deliberate act of sabotage designed to frighten me, to punish me for my independence. And my husband, Mark, was in on it. He knew, he had known all along. He had let me drive that car, knowing it was a ticking time bomb. The betrayal was so profound, so monstrous, it felt like it was physically crushing my chest. I wasn't just dealing with a malicious father-in-law. I was married to a monster. For a long time, I just sat in the dark, the damning audio clip playing on a loop in my headphones. The initial shock gave way to a wave of pure, unadulterated rage. It was a cold, sharp fury unlike anything I had ever felt before. They hadn't just put me in danger, they had tried to break my spirit, to put me back in a box they had designed for me. They wanted a submissive, compliant woman, and they were willing to risk my life to get one. They had underestimated me. They thought I would come running back to Mark, crying and helpless, ready to finally let Frank and his patriarchal authority take control. They had no idea who they were dealing with. My job had trained me to be methodical, to gather data, to document everything, and to build an airtight case before taking action. That is exactly what I was going to do now. My first step was to secure the evidence. I saved the dashcam audio to my laptop, to a cloud drive, and to a separate USB stick that I hid in my office. That recording was my smoking gun, and I would guard it with my life. My next step was to get a full, independent report on what Frank had actually done to my car. The dealership was a good start, but I needed an expert, someone who could not only identify the sabotage, but would also be willing to put it in writing and potentially testify to it if needed. This was where my best friend Jenna came in. I called her, my voice surprisingly steady. "Jenna, can I come over? Something has happened, something bad." Jenna had been my rock since college. She was a paralegal at a civil litigation firm, and her mind was as sharp as a tack. When I arrived at her apartment and played her the audio, her jaw dropped. She listened to it 3 times, her expression shifting from disbelief to incandescent fury on my behalf. "Oh, you are not going to let them get away with this," she said, her voice a low growl. "These men are garbage, absolute garbage." Jenna immediately went into professional mode. "Okay, first things first, we need an independent mechanic, someone with a sterling reputation who does forensic work. My firm uses a guy, an ex-dealership master tech named Dave. He specializes in investigating warranty fraud and accident causes. He's expensive, but he's the best. He'll give us a report so detailed it will make their heads spin." The next morning, I called Maria at the dealership, told her I was having the car moved to a specialist, and arranged for it to be flatbedded to Dave's garage. I didn't want anyone else driving it or even starting it. It was a piece of evidence now. While the car was in transit, Jenna and I started digging into another area, my finances. "If they're capable of this," Jenna reasoned, "they're capable of anything. Mark and his father are clearly a team. You need to know exactly where your money is." Mark and I had a joint savings account and separate checking accounts, but he handled most of the bill payments and investments. I had always trusted him with it, my own job being so demanding that I was happy to let him take the lead. It was a foolish, naive mistake. That afternoon, I logged into our joint accounts, my stomach twisting into knots. What I found was a pattern of systematic financial abuse. For the past year, Mark had been making regular, monthly transfers from our joint savings account to a personal account I didn't recognize. The amounts weren't huge at first, a few $100s here and there, but they had been escalating. In total, he had siphoned off nearly $15,000. I followed the money trail. The transfers from the unknown account went to pay for things like expensive golf club memberships, weekends away with his buddies that I was never invited to, and high-end electronics that he'd claimed he got a great deal on. But the most damning discovery was a single, large transfer made 2 months ago, $5,000, transferred from our joint account to his father. The memo line read simply, "Loan repayment." A loan I knew nothing about. What had he needed $5,000 from his father for, and why was he paying it back with our money? It clicked into place with sickening clarity. Mark was financially dependent on his father, or at least beholden to him. This gave Frank incredible leverage over his son. Frank wasn't just a domineering father, he was Mark's creditor. It explained why Mark was so quick to defend him, so willing to throw me under the bus. His loyalty wasn't to me, it was to his father's wallet. This whole scheme with the car was likely Frank's idea, a way to reassert his dominance over his son's household, and Mark, weak and financially compromised, had gone right along with it. Late that afternoon, Dave, the mechanic, called. His voice was grim. "Ma'am, I've finished my preliminary inspection. You were right to be suspicious. This wasn't a mechanical failure. It was sabotage. And it was done by someone who knew exactly what they were doing." He proceeded to explain in precise, technical detail what Frank had done. He hadn't just loosened a sensor. He had bypassed it and then used a custom tool to deliberately score and damage a critical crankshaft position sensor relay. But the real masterstroke was what he'd done to the fuel pump fuse. He had cleverly and carefully filed down one of the metal prongs, making it incredibly thin. It would have held the connection for a while, Dave explained, long enough for you to drive away and think everything was fine. But with the engine's vibration and the electrical current, it was guaranteed to fail. The prong would overheat, break, and cut all power to the fuel pump instantly. It's a miracle it didn't happen when you were pulling out into traffic. This is one of the most malicious things I've ever seen. This wasn't just meant to strand you. On a busy highway, this could have been fatal. I felt all the air leave my lungs. Fatal. He had set a trap that could have killed me. For what? To teach me respect? The investigation was over. I had all the evidence I needed. This was no longer just about a divorce. This was about justice. The mechanic's report was the final piece of the puzzle. Dave emailed me a 12-page document complete with high-resolution photographs of the failed down fuse, the damaged relay, and a detailed explanation of how the sabotage would have played out. It was a cold, clinical indictment of Frank's actions. Holding that report, I felt a shift inside me. The fear was gone, the anger was gone, replaced by a steely, diamond-hard resolve. My objective was no longer just to escape. It was to dismantle their world as completely and methodically as they had tried to dismantle my car. Jenna came over that night, and we laid everything out on my dining room table. Dave's report, the printouts of the bank statements, and the USB drive with the Dashcam audio. We called it our war room. Legally, Jenna began, tapping a pen on the mechanic's report, you have them dead to rights on several fronts. Civilly, you can sue Frank for the cost of repairs, endangerment, and emotional distress. With Mark, you have a divorce case that's going to be incredibly one-sided. The financial infidelity alone is huge, but his complicity in the sabotage, no judge is going to look kindly on that. But a messy, protracted legal battle was only part of the solution. That was justice on paper. I wanted them to experience a fraction of the public humiliation and loss of control that they had intended for me. We needed a plan that was both legal and deeply personal. The stage for this confrontation had to be perfect, and I knew just the place: Sunday dinner. For years, Sunday dinner at my mother-in-law's house had been a mandatory command performance. It was Frank's court, where he sat at the head of the table, dispensing his wisdom and expecting fealty. It was the perfect venue to dethrone the king in front of his subjects. Our plan had 3 phases. Phase 1, secure my future. The very next morning, I went to my bank. I opened a new checking and savings account in my name only. I then went to my company's HR department and redirected my direct deposit to the new account. Next, I systematically went through our joint accounts online. I calculated exactly half of the legitimate, shared money, the money that was left after Mark's secret withdrawals, and I transferred that half to my new savings account. I then took screen captures of every single unauthorized transfer Mark had made to his secret account and to his father. I was building a fortress of financial independence, brick by digital brick. I also called my own lawyer, a woman highly recommended by Jenna's firm, who specialized in contentious divorces. I spent 2 hours on the phone with her, walking her through everything. By the end of the call, she was practically salivating. "This is a gift," she told me. "We're going to get you everything." Phase 2 set the stage. For the rest of the week, I played the part of the dutiful, slightly distressed wife. When Mark came home from work, I told him the dealership had found a major electrical fault and that it was going to be an expensive fix. I let him rant about how we should have taken it to his father. I just nodded and looked weary, allowing him to think he was right and that I was regretting my stubbornness. His arrogance was nauseating, but it was also useful. He was so confident in his deception that he didn't see the trap being laid. "Well, you'll have to apologize to Dad on Sunday," he said smugly. "He was just trying to help, and you threw it in his face." "You're right," I said, my voice dripping with false contrition. "I'll be sure to thank him for all his help at dinner." The look of triumphant satisfaction on his face was something I would treasure. He thought he had won. He thought I had been humbled. Phase 3, the confrontation. For Sunday dinner, I prepared a small care package. It contained 3 manila envelopes. The first envelope was for Frank. It contained a copy of Dave's complete mechanical report, highlighting the sections on malicious sabotage, along with a glossy 8x10 photo of the filed-down fuel pump fuse. It also contained a formal letter from my lawyer demanding payment for the full cost of the car's repair, plus damages for reckless endangerment, and informing him that a copy of the report was being sent to the state's Automotive Licensing Board. The second envelope was for Mark. It contained printouts of every single unauthorized bank transfer he had ever made, including the $5,000 loan repayment to Frank. It also contained the divorce papers, already filed, which cited financial infidelity and conspiracy to cause harm. The third envelope was for my mother-in-law, a woman who had always been a passive enabler of her husband's behavior. It contained a simple note: "Ask your husband and your son what they did." The final piece of my arsenal was a small, high-quality Bluetooth speaker that I tucked into my purse. It was loaded with only one audio file, the Dashcam recording. I was ready. Driving to my in-laws' house that Sunday in a rental car paid for by my new private bank account, I felt a strange sense of calm. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't scared. I was a researcher presenting her findings. I had the data, I had the evidence, and I was about to publish my results in the most explosive way possible. They wanted to teach me a lesson about respect. I was about to give them a masterclass in consequences. I walked into my in-laws' house with a polite smile fixed on my face. The familiar smell of roast beef and my mother-in-law, Carol's, anxiety filled the air. Mark was already there, laughing with his father in the living room, a beer in his hand. They both looked over at me as I entered. "There she is," Frank boomed, his voice full of false bonhomie. "Heard you had a little car trouble. Should have listened to me." He winked at Mark, a shared moment of conspiratorial pride. I just smiled back. "We can talk about that later, Frank. It smells delicious in here, Carol." I played my part through the pre-dinner small talk, complimenting the food, asking about their week. Mark was practically glowing with smugness, occasionally patting my arm in a condescendingly reassuring way. He thought I had come here to capitulate, to admit defeat. The sense of dramatic irony was so thick I could have cut it with a dinner knife. We sat down at the dining table in our usual seats. Frank at one end, the patriarch on his throne, Mark to his right, the crown prince, Carol and I on the sides, the supporting cast. As Carol brought out the main course, Frank looked at me expectantly. "So," he began, carving the roast with a flourish. "Mark tells me those dealership clowns are taking you for a ride on the repair bill. I hope you've learned your lesson about trusting real experts." This was my opening. I placed my napkin neatly in my lap, looked directly at Frank, and kept my voice calm and even. "Actually, Frank, I learned a very important lesson. I learned that I should always trust my instincts, and I learned the value of getting a second opinion from a true expert." I reached into my bag and pulled out the Bluetooth speaker, placing it in the center of the table. Mark frowned. "Clara, what is that?" Before he could say more, I pressed play. Frank's voice filled the sudden silence of the dining room, low, conspiratorial, and dripping with malice. "Don't you worry. I'm setting it up right now. It'll go for a day or two, maybe even 3. Then, nothing, it'll just die, no warning at all. This should do it. This will teach her to be a little more respectful." The recording ended, leaving behind a silence so profound it felt like a physical weight. Carol's face was a mask of confusion. Mark's face had gone chalk-white, all the color draining from it as if a plug had been pulled. He looked like he was going to be sick, but Frank's face was the most telling. It wasn't shock or fear. It was pure, unfiltered rage. The rage of a tyrant who had just been exposed. "What is this?" he snarled, his eyes boring into me. "What kind of trick are you playing?" "It's not a trick, Frank," I said calmly, pulling the first manila envelope from my bag and sliding it across the table towards him. "It's called evidence. That's a full forensic report from a certified mechanic detailing exactly how you sabotaged my car. Pay special attention to the photos of the fuel pump fuse you filed down. A copy of that report, along with the audio you just heard, is being sent to the Better Business Bureau and the state licensing board that oversees your garage. My lawyer says reckless endangerment is such an ugly term." Frank stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. He didn't open it. He didn't have to. He knew what was inside. His knuckles were white where he gripped his carving knife. I then turned to my husband. "Mark," I said, my voice losing its clinical detachment and taking on a tremor of genuine, deep-seated pain. "I always knew you were weak. I always knew you put your father's approval above our marriage, but I never thought you were cruel. I never thought you'd listen to him plan to put my life in danger and do nothing." I slid the second envelope over to him. "Those are copies of your secret bank statements, showing all the money you stole from our joint savings. And those," I added, my voice dropping to a near whisper, "are the divorce papers. You'll be served officially tomorrow morning." Mark stared at the papers, his mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish out of water. He looked from the papers to his father, his eyes pleading for help, but Frank was still frozen, his own world collapsing around him. Finally, I looked at Carol, whose face was now streaked with tears. She had been a silent partner in Frank's emotional abuse for decades, always smoothing things over, always begging me to just understand him. "I'm sorry you have to be here for this, Carol," I said, my voice softening with a shred of pity. I slid the third, smaller envelope to her. "But you deserve to know the kind of men you're living with." Carol finally broke. "Frank." "Mark, is this true?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "What did you do?" Frank slammed his fist on the table, making the dishes rattle. "She's lying. The little witch is making it all up to destroy our family." But his denial was hollow, his bluster completely deflated by the undeniable proof of the recording. No one at that table believed him. I stood up, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. The meal was untouched. The perfect family dinner was in ruins. "I'm not destroying this family, Frank," I said, my voice ringing with clarity and power. "I'm just showing everyone what it was already made of: lies, theft, and contempt. You two enjoy your dinner." And with that, I turned around, walked out the front door, and never looked back. The days and weeks that followed my departure were a whirlwind of legal activity and personal liberation. The Sunday dinner ambush had been a tactical nuke, and the fallout was spectacular. My lawyer was, as she had promised, an absolute shark. Armed with the Dashcam audio and the irrefutable proof of financial infidelity, she completely dismantled Mark's legal position. He had tried to fight the divorce, to argue for a larger share of our assets, but it was hopeless. The judge took one look at the evidence of his complicity in the sabotage plot and his secret siphoning of our funds and essentially threw the book at him. In the settlement, I got the house, which I promptly put on the market, the majority of our savings, and he was ordered to pay for the entirety of my legal fees. He was left with his secret debt to his father and the consequences of his own spinelessness. Frank's world crumbled even more publicly. As promised, my lawyer sent the evidence packet to the state licensing board. They opened an immediate investigation into his garage. Word travels fast in a small town, and the story of what he had done, embellished and spread through local gossip, was a death sentence for his business. His longtime customers, people who had trusted him for years, abandoned him overnight. His online reviews became a dumpster fire of one-star ratings and comments referencing the story. Within 3 months, Frank's Auto, the two-generation family legacy he was so proud of, was forced to close its doors for good. The final insult came when I filed a civil suit against him for damages. Faced with the overwhelming evidence, his insurance company settled out of court for a sum that not only covered the extensive repairs to my car, but also provided a very comfortable cushion for my new life. But the real victory wasn't financial. It was the profound, soul-deep sense of peace that came from severing ties with such toxic people. I learned through the grapevine that Mark had moved back in with his parents, a 34-year-old man forced back into the nest, now completely under his disgraced father's thumb. Their relationship, once built on a foundation of shared secrets and patriarchal control, had reportedly soured into one of bitter resentment and blame. They had got what they wanted, each other, and were now trapped in a prison of their own making. For my part, I focused on rebuilding. I sold the house I had shared with Mark and used the money to buy a small, bright condo in the city, closer to my work and my friends. I threw myself into my job with a renewed sense of purpose, earning a promotion within 6 months. My life became my own again, dictated by my own terms, not by the expectations of a weak man and his cruel father. The dealership was able to fully repair my car. The technicians, who had heard the story from the service manager Maria, treated the vehicle with an almost reverential respect when I came to pick it up. They had replaced the entire fuel system and the damaged electrical components, and it ran better than ever. But driving it felt wrong. It was a beautiful car, but it was tainted by the memory of what had happened. It was a symbol of my old life, of my vulnerability. So, I sold it. A week later, I walked into a dealership and bought myself a brand new car. It was nothing fancy, just a safe, reliable, and entirely new vehicle. The color was a bright, optimistic blue. As I sat in the driver's seat, the new car smell filling my senses, I felt the last vestiges of the ordeal fall away. This car wasn't a link to my past, it was the vehicle for my future. I adjusted the mirrors, turned on the radio, and pulled out onto the road. The engine was quiet and smooth, the journey ahead was clear, and for the first time in a very long time, I was the only one behind the wheel. And I was heading exactly where I wanted to go.